May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Have you ever had an experience that takes you outside of yourself? It could be going to an enormous sporting event where you're part of a gigantic crowd, or going to something dramatic and seeing a performance that was perfection, passing something in life, going through a barrier that you thought you couldn't pass and succeeding at a target that you've set yourself, going on to a new phase of life, some experience that lifts you above the ordinary and takes you out. Peter, James and John, the inner council of Jesus' disciples, had witnessed a large number of remarkable events during their time with the Lord, during the ministry around Galilee and then later Jerusalem. And yet they seem unaware of his real identity. Who do people say I am? Says Jesus in chapter 8 of Mark. And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. But what about you, he asks. Who do you say I am? Peter answered, you are the Messiah. Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Mark 8, 27-29. Very succinct. And then we have this next chapter, and we have the mountain experience. It was vital that the leadership and then eventually the disciples and then the church knew more. But there was a time to tell them, a time for the unfolding to happen. That's why the mountain experience is so necessary. The transfiguration is what we call it in the feasts of the church. It happens at different times during the year. There's more than one occasion when we celebrate it. On the mountain, Jesus is revealed as Lord. Perhaps now these three disciples begin just vaguely to have the first awareness that he is perhaps God. The title Messiah, although an exalted one, was generally thought to refer to a human being by most Jews of Jesus' day. It was meant to be a political leader who would restore a purified version of Israel, an inspired prophetic leader who would combine perhaps the two roles, but it was never meant to be the revelation that Jesus would bring and the reinterpretation that he would give it. Without elaborating, Jesus had accepted this title and told the disciples to keep it under wraps for now. He reinterpreted it radically, as we now know, by his life and death and resurrection. It is into this extraordinary story that we are included. We're drawn in. It's meant for us. The people who take part in that story are now long gone. The story's meant for us, for the church ever since. It unfolds to us the meaning of Jesus' message and mission. Peter, James and John are overwhelmed. They're completely taken aback by the experience. They don't know how to respond. And do we know how to respond when God first knocks at the door? Elijah represents the prophets. He's the sort of prophet par excellence. He's the one who was taken up into heaven, so there's no record he didn't die. He went in his chariot of fire. Moses represents the law, the structure, the day-to-day ideas and behaviours that kept the community of Israel throughout all their trials and tribulations together. So the two great authorities in Jewish life, the law and the prophets, Elijah and Moses. The voice of God that comes, though, says that Jesus is superior to both. Jesus is the ultimate authority. Peter, James, and John were changed forever by this experience. However, it took time to process its full meaning, probably years. But their immediate reaction, rather like us when we first come in contact with God, is often rather clumsily to build lodgings, very worldly things, build a lodging for all three of their respected leaders, giving equal precedence to each. And then the cloud comes down and the voice makes it obvious more is required. It spells out Jesus is different. Jesus is Lord. He's not a religious leader. He's not the voice of God operating through another human being alone. He is that, but he's more than that. He is Lord, and where Lord is used here, it doesn't mean master, as some interpret it. It's there instead of pronouncing the name of God. Adonai is Lord in Hebrew. That's why we see it translated for the word Yahweh. Jesus is God. At the end of this episode, the group go down the mountain again. We can't stay up on the mountains. If you've ever stayed on top of a mountain, you would know there aren't any facilities there. And when ordinary life starts to reassert itself, you can't actually survive on top of the mountain, albeit the view is unbelievable and the experience is often unbelievable. They go back to ordinary life. This story packed with symbolism, replete with it. Going up the mountain is a great symbol for leaving the ordinary world behind. You do when you do it. Even physically, when we go and visit the mountains, that's what we do. To see something else, to experience something else. I remember years and years ago climbing Ben Macdui, second highest mountain in the UK, in Scotland. But because it's in the middle, it's in the middle of the Cairngorms, the view from the top is better than the view from Ben Nevis. And we were lucky when we got there. It was in high summer, on a day when there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I could see the whole of Scotland. It was breathtaking. The cloud comes down on the mountain. It takes them out of all of their comfort zones. And it's the presence of God. And then they go back down to normality. But what of us? Where in our lives does God overwhelm us with that mountaintop view? In our ordinary selves, in our ordinary days, in the middle of COVID even, so that he can break through. In nature, in friendships, in love, in family, in knowledge, in truth, in sharing the stories of others and with each other, growing in wisdom, aging with grace, learning to live joyfully wherever we are and in whatever circumstances. That's our calling. Practicing gratitude, healing the world, although it's often unpleasant, the world, and even though it needs healing, we often think it's someone else's responsibility. Speaking out against injustice, taking action in God's name, acting in the service to the truth, trusting in God's care. All of these and more are ordinary life experiences. They're happening every day, and people, Christians, are carrying them out in God's name, but quietly. Actions speak louder than words. All of them are ordinary life experiences, but with Christ in the midst of them, they are also more. It is, of course, the case that God sometimes does call us up a psychological mountain to ensure we listen clearly, when he shuts out all the other noise, all the other distractions, and says, shakes us and says, listen. That happens too. He needs to break through to us sometimes through the noise of daily life and all its cares. But the message from countless witnesses down the ages is that God hallows time. He makes the ordinary holy. And usually, he meets with us where we are in ordinary daily life. You matter where you are, because that's where God will meet you most likely. And then, and in that, he takes us outside ourselves. And there he gives us blessings. Amen. So stay safe. God bless. Hope to see you soon. Amen.